The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle, as King Charles III stood at his study window, watching the grounds come alive with activity. His fingers drummed against the mahogany windowsill, a habit that had developed since his coronation. The weight of the crown, though not physically present, seemed heavier with each passing day. Sarah, his private secretary, knocked softly before entering with a stack of official papers. "Your Majesty, the schedule for next week's engagements needs your attention," she said, placing the documents on his desk. Charles turned from the window, his face bearing the lines of concern that had become more pronounced lately. "Tell me, Sarah, what's the latest on William and Catherine's commitments?" he asked, settling into his leather chair. The question carried more weight than a simple scheduling inquiry. For weeks, palace insiders had been whispering about the Prince and Princess of Wales reducing their public appearances. Sarah cleared, her throat delicately. "Sir, they've requested to postpone 3 major engagements this month: the Children's Charity Gala, the Veterans Memorial Service, and the Trade Delegation Dinner." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "They've cited the need to focus on the children's education and family commitments." Charles nodded slowly, understanding the deeper implications. William and Catherine had always been dedicated to their royal duties, but recently, something had shifted. Perhaps it was the mounting pressure of being next in line, or the constant media scrutiny that seemed to intensify with each public appearance. Whatever the reason, their withdrawal left gaps that needed filling. The king's mind wandered to his younger brother Edward and his wife Sophie. The Earl and Countess of Wessex had always been reliable, working steadily behind the scenes without seeking the spotlight. They carried out their duties with quiet dignity, supporting causes close to their hearts while maintaining a lower profile than other senior royals. "Arrange a meeting with Edward and Sophie," Charles said finally. "I believe it's time we had a conversation about expanding their roles within the family business." Sarah made a note, recognizing the significance of the king's decision. The royal family was about to undergo another quiet but meaningful restructuring. Later that afternoon, Charles found himself reflecting on the challenges facing the modern monarchy. Public opinion polls showed mixed feelings about the royal family's relevance in contemporary Britain. Younger generations questioned the institution's place in modern society, while traditional supporters worried about its future stability. The palace halls echoed with centuries of history, but Charles knew that history alone wouldn't guarantee the monarchy's survival. They needed active, engaged members who could connect with people from all walks of life. William and Catherine had excelled at this, bringing a fresh, relatable energy to royal duties. Their temporary step back created both a challenge and an opportunity. Edward and Sophie represented a different approach to royal service. They worked without fanfare, supporting numerous charities and organizations with genuine dedication. Sophie, in particular, had become passionate about supporting survivors of sexual violence and championing women's rights globally. Edward's work with the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme had touched thousands of young lives. As evening approached, Charles walked through the portrait gallery, past paintings of monarchs who had faced their own crises and changes. Each reign had brought adaptations to meet the times. His great-great-grandmother Victoria had overseen the monarchy's transition through the Industrial Revolution. His mother Elizabeth II had guided it through decades of social change and technological advancement. Now it was his turn to navigate the institution through another period of transformation. The decision to expand Edward and Sophie's roles wasn't just about filling scheduling gaps. It was about demonstrating the monarchy's ability to adapt and find strength in its quieter, more dedicated members. The next morning brought news that would test the family's unity. A prominent royal correspondent had caught wind of William and Catherine's reduced schedule and was preparing a story questioning their commitment to royal duties. The palace press office worked frantically to manage the narrative, but Charles knew that actions would speak louder than any public relations effort. He thought about his conversation with William from the previous week. His son had spoken candidly about the pressures of balancing royal expectations with being a hands-on father to George, Charlotte, and Louis. Catherine had echoed these concerns, expressing her desire to be more present during crucial years in their children's development. Charles understood their position better than most. He remembered his own struggles balancing duty with fatherhood, the missed school plays and birthday parties that royal obligations had demanded. He didn't want his son and daughter-in-law to face the same regrets. The solution seemed clear, even if it would require delicate handling. Edward and Sophie had proven themselves over 2 decades of service. They understood the protocols, maintained excellent relationships with their patronages, and handled media attention with grace and professionalism. As Charles prepared for the ITY upcoming family meeting, he felt a mixture of concern and optimism. The monarchy had survived far greater challenges than a temporary reshuffling of duties. What mattered most was ensuring that the institution continued to serve the British people effectively, while supporting family members through their various life stages. The late afternoon sun filtered through the castle windows as Charles finalized his thoughts. Tomorrow's conversation with Edward and Sophie would mark the beginning of a new chapter for the working royals. He hoped that by the end of it, they would all have a clearer path forward, one that honored both duty and family needs in equal measure. The morning mist clung to the gardens of Bagshot Park as Edward and Sophie prepared for their unexpected summons to meet with the king. Sophie adjusted her navy blazer while Edward reviewed his calendar, both sensing that this wasn't going to be an ordinary family gathering. "Do you think this is about the Wales situation?" Sophie asked, applying a subtle shade of lipstick that had become her signature look. She had always possessed an intuitive understanding of palace dynamics, honed through years of navigating the complex relationships within the royal family. Edward paused in straightening his tie. "Most likely. Charles has been watching how we handle our commitments. I think he's noticed that we rarely cancel engagements or create scheduling difficulties." There was no boastfulness in his tone, merely a quiet acknowledgement of their consistent approach to royal service. The drive to Windsor Castle gave them time to discuss the possibilities ahead. Sophie gazed out at the countryside, thinking about the various causes she had championed over the years. Her work with survivors of sexual violence had earned international recognition, while her support for avoidable blindness prevention had taken her to some of the world's most remote locations. "We've always said we were ready to do more if the family needed us," she said thoughtfully. Edward nodded, remembering countless conversations where they had discussed their willingness to take on additional responsibilities should circumstances require it. Their approach to royal duties had evolved organically over the years. Unlike some family members who attracted constant media attention, Edward and Sophie had developed a more measured relationship with the press. They fulfilled their obligations professionally, attended required events, and supported their patronages, without generating headlines or controversies. Upon arriving at Windsor Castle, they were greeted by Charles himself, rather than palace staff. This personal touch immediately signaled the importance of their meeting. The king looked tired but determined, carrying himself with the authority that had grown more pronounced since his coronation. "Edward, Sophie, thank you for coming so quickly," Charles said, embracing them both warmly. "I hope you don't mind, but I wanted to discuss something important with you both." He led them to his private sitting room, where coffee and pastries had been arranged on a side table. As they settled into comfortable chairs, Charles began explaining the situation with characteristic directness. "As you're both aware, William and Catherine have requested some adjustments to their schedule. They want to focus more intensively on the children during this crucial period in their development." Sophie and Edward exchanged glances, having suspected this might be the topic of conversation. They had noticed the gradual reduction in the Wales family's public appearances and had wondered about the reasons behind it. "They're not stepping away permanently," Charles continued, "but they need some breathing room to be the parents they want to be. I respect their decision completely, but it does create gaps that need to be filled by other family members." Edward leaned forward slightly. "Charles, we've always been ready to do whatever the family requires. Our calendars can certainly accommodate additional commitments." His response was immediate and sincere, reflecting years of readiness for exactly this type of request. Sophie nodded in agreement. We understand the pressures William and Catherine face. The media scrutiny alone must be overwhelming, especially with 3 young children to consider. Her empathy was genuine, having experienced her own share of press attention over the years. Charles felt a wave of relief at their response. He had known he could count on their support, but hearing their immediate willingness to help confirmed his decision to approach them first. I was hoping you might consider taking on some of the patronages and engagements that would otherwise fall to William and Catherine. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, covering everything from specific events to long-term strategic planning. Edward and Sophie asked thoughtful questions about expectations, protocols, and how their expanded roles might affect their existing commitments. We wouldn't want to abandon the causes we're already passionate about, Sophie explained. My work, with sexual violence survivors and Edward's involvement with the Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, are too important to us personally. Charles assured them that their existing work would remain priorities. I want you to expand your influence, not replace what you're already doing successfully. The monarchy is strongest when each member can pursue their genuine interests while fulfilling their duties. By the end of their meeting, the framework for their enhanced roles had been established. Edward would take on additional Veterans Affairs and youth development programs, while Sophie would expand her international women's rights work and take on several high-profile charity patronages. As they prepared to leave, Charles pulled them aside for a more personal conversation. I want you both to know how much I value your dedication over the years. You've served quietly and effectively, and now the family needs that steady presence more than ever. Sophie felt moved by the king's words. She and Edward had sometimes felt overshadowed by more prominent family members, but this conversation confirmed that their contributions had been noticed and appreciated. The drive back to Bagshot Park was filled with excited discussion about their expanded responsibilities. Both felt energized by the prospect of taking on more significant roles while supporting William and Catherine through their family-focused period. It feels like we're entering a new phase, Sophie said, as they pulled into their driveway. Edward agreed, already mentally preparing for the increased demands that would come with their elevated positions within the working royal family. That evening, they called their children to share the news, explaining that while their lives would become busier, the family had always understood that royal service sometimes required sacrifices and adjustments. As they settled in for the night, both Edward and Sophie felt a mixture of anticipation and responsibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they were ready to step forward and serve the crown with the same dedication they had always shown, just on a much larger scale. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of Kensington Palace as Catherine sat at her kitchen table, helping Charlotte with her morning reading practice while George finished his breakfast. The scene was remarkably ordinary for a future queen, but that sense of normalcy was exactly what she and William had been fighting to preserve. William appeared in the doorway, already dressed for his reduced schedule of meetings. He watched his wife patiently guiding their daughter through a challenging paragraph and felt a familiar surge of gratitude for their decision to step back from some royal obligations. "Mummy, will you be here when I get home from school?" Louis asked, looking up from his cereal bowl with those curious eyes that reminded everyone of his late grandmother Diana. "Yes, darling, I'll be right here," Catherine replied, ruffling his hair affectionately. These moments of certainty had become precious to her, knowing that for too long, royal duties had made such promises difficult to keep. The decision to reduce their public commitments hadn't been made lightly. Both William and Catherine had spent countless evenings discussing the balance between their royal responsibilities and their roles as parents. They had seen how public life could consume a family, leaving little room for the quiet moments that build strong foundations. The children are only young once, Catherine had argued during one of their late-night conversations. We can't get these years back, William. They need us to be present, not just physically, but emotionally available. William had agreed completely, though he worried about public perception and the pressure it might place on other family members. His conversation with his father had been reassuring, with Charles expressing understanding and support for their decision. After the children left for school with their security detail, William and Catherine sat together in their private sitting room, reviewing the day's scaled-back agenda. Where once their calendars had been packed with back-to-back engagements, they now had spaces for school pickups, homework help, and family dinners. "I had coffee with Sophie yesterday," Catherine mentioned, stirring honey into her tea. "She seems genuinely excited about taking on more responsibilities. I think she's been ready for this opportunity for years." William nodded, feeling relieved that the transition of duties was being handled so smoothly. "Edward called me last night. They both seem to understand that this isn't about us abandoning our roles permanently. It's about finding a sustainable balance." Their decision had been influenced partly by watching other royal families around the world. They had seen how some had adapted to modern expectations about family life, while others had struggled with the rigid demands of traditional royal protocols. Catherine stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where the children often played. "Do you remember what your mother said about being a hands-on parent while being royal? She always regretted missing so many of your milestones because of duty." The reference to Diana was gentle but pointed. Both William and Catherine were determined not to repeat the mistakes of previous generations, where royal obligations had sometimes overshadowed family relationships. Their reduced schedule didn't mean complete withdrawal from public life. They still maintained their most important patronages and attended crucial state functions. The difference was in their approach to additional requests and optional engagements, where they now felt comfortable saying no when family time was at stake. "The investiture ceremony next month will still require our attendance," William said, checking his revised calendar. "But I'm glad we cleared the evening so we can have dinner with the children afterward." Catherine smiled, remembering how such family dinners had once been rare occasions squeezed between royal obligations. Now they were becoming the norm again, creating stability for George, Charlotte, and Louis during their formative years. Their decision had also been influenced by changes in public expectations about work-life balance. Modern families, royal or not, were increasingly prioritizing quality time together over external pressures to maintain constant professional availability. "I think people understand more than we expected," Catherine said, reflecting on the surprisingly positive response they had received from the public. Parents everywhere struggle with these same decisions about balancing career demands with family needs. The afternoon brought a call from Charles, checking in on how they were adjusting to their modified schedule. His support had been unwavering, though William knew his father was managing criticism from some quarters about the family's work distribution. "Your father sounded pleased about Edward and Sophie's response," Catherine observed after William finished the call. "I think this arrangement might actually strengthen the family's overall effectiveness." William agreed, recognizing that Edward and Sophie brought different strengths to royal service. Their quieter approach and genuine passion for their causes might actually connect better with certain audiences than the high-profile nature of his and Catherine's usual engagements. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table with all three children, William and Catherine felt the rightness of their decision. George was excitedly describing a science project, Charlotte was planning her weekend art activities, and Louis was simply enjoying being the center of attention. "Will you come to my school play next week, Daddy?" Charlotte asked, and William was able to answer with complete confidence. "I wouldn't miss it for anything, sweetheart," he replied, knowing that his calendar was clear and would remain so for her important moments. Catherine watched her husband's face as he made that promise, seeing the peace that had settled over his features since they had restructured their priorities. The constant tension between duty and family that had marked their early married years was finally easing. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, both reflected on how their decision was affecting the wider royal family. Reports suggested that Edward and Sophie were thriving in their expanded roles, bringing fresh energy to causes that might have otherwise received less attention. "We've made the right choice," Catherine said softly, and William nodded, feeling more confident in their path than he had in years. Their temporary step back was allowing them to be the parents they wanted to be, while also creating opportunities for other family members to shine in new ways. The grand ballroom at Buckingham Palace buzzed with anticipation as Sophie made her final preparations for the evening's charity gala. This was her first major solo event since taking on expanded royal duties, and the significance wasn't lost on anyone present. Palace staff moved efficiently around her, ensuring every detail met the exacting standards expected of royal occasions. Sophie stood before a full-length mirror, adjusting the sapphire necklace that had belonged to her late mother-in-law. The weight of the jewelry seemed symbolic of the heavier responsibilities she now carried. Her personal stylist made final touches to her midnight blue gown, a choice that struck the perfect balance between elegance and accessibility. Your Royal Highness, the guest list includes several international dignitaries, her private secretary informed her, reviewing the evening's protocol one final time. Sophie nodded, her calm demeanor masking the flutter of nerves she felt about representing the royal family at such a high-profile event. The charity gala was raising funds for survivors of sexual violence, a cause that had become deeply personal to Sophie over the years. Her work in this area had taken her to refugee camps, courtrooms, and counseling centers around the world. Tonight she would be speaking to an audience that included government ministers, celebrities, and international aid workers. As guests began arriving, Sophie moved gracefully through the receiving line, greeting each person with genuine warmth. Her approach differed noticeably from some other royals who maintained more formal distance. She asked specific questions about people's work, remembered details from previous meetings, and showed authentic interest in their responses. Your Royal Highness, it's wonderful to see the royal family taking such a strong stance on these issues, commented the ambassador from Denmark, who had traveled specifically to attend the event. Sophie smiled, recognizing that her expanded role was being watched carefully by international observers. Edward arrived midway through the cocktail reception, having completed his own engagement at a veterans rehabilitation center earlier that day. His presence provided quiet support, though he was careful to let Sophie take the lead as the evening's primary host. The dinner program began with Sophie delivering a speech that had taken her weeks to prepare. Unlike the sometimes formal addresses, typical of royal events, her words were personal and passionate, drawing on her direct experiences working with survivors. When I first began this work years ago, I thought my role would be primarily ceremonial, she said to the hushed audience. I quickly learned that true advocacy requires more than just attending events. It means listening to difficult stories, supporting uncomfortable truths, and committing to long-term change. The response was immediate and powerful. Several attendees later commented that they had never heard a royal speak so directly about such sensitive issues. Sophie's authenticity resonated throughout the room, creating connections that went beyond typical diplomatic pleasantries. During the dinner courses, Sophie engaged in substantive conversations with leaders from various organizations. Her knowledge of policy details and funding challenges impressed guests who had expected more superficial royal engagement. She really understands the complexities we face, whispered the director of a women's shelter to her companion. This isn't just a photo opportunity for her. The evening's success was evident in the final fundraising totals, which exceeded expectations by nearly 30%. More importantly, several new partnerships were formed between organizations that had never collaborated before, inspired by conversations initiated at the Royal Gala. As the event concluded, Sophie felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond the evening's tangible achievements. She had successfully carried out a major royal engagement while advancing causes she genuinely cared about. The combination felt powerful and sustainable in ways her previous, more limited role hadn't always provided. Edward joined her in the palace's private quarters afterward, both reflecting on how much their lives had changed in recent weeks. You were magnificent tonight, he told her, meaning every word. I think you've found your stride in this new role. Sophie smiled, feeling the truth of his observation. The expanded responsibilities had initially seemed daunting, but tonight had proven that she was ready for them. Her years of quieter service had prepared her well for this more prominent position. The next morning brought newspaper coverage that exceeded their expectations. Rather than focusing solely on fashion choices or guest lists, most outlets highlighted Sophie's speech and the evening's fundraising success. Several columnists noted the fresh energy she was bringing to royal charitable work. The Countess of Wessex demonstrated last night That effective royal service comes from genuine passion rather than mere obligation, wrote one influential royal correspondent. The review went on to praise her knowledge and commitment, suggesting that her expanded role might breathe new life into certain areas of royal philanthropy. Palace officials were particularly pleased with the international attention the event had generated. Sophie's work on global women's issues was attracting positive coverage from outlets that had sometimes been critical of the royal family's relevance in modern society. Phone calls from other organizations began arriving almost immediately, requesting Sophie's patronage or involvement in upcoming events. Her private secretary worked to manage the increased demand while ensuring they maintained quality over quantity in their commitments. "We need to be strategic about which additional opportunities we accept," Sophie discussed with Edward over breakfast. "I don't want to spread myself so thin that the work loses its impact." Their conversation reflected the mature approach they were taking to their enhanced roles. Rather than accepting every invitation, they were carefully selecting engagements that aligned with their established interests and expertise. The success of the gala had also caught the attention of Buckingham Palace senior staff, who began consulting Sophie about other events and initiatives. Her input was being sought on everything from guest list development to program planning for upcoming state visits. That afternoon, Sophie received a personal call from Catherine, congratulating her on the previous evening's success. "You've set a wonderful example of how these events can be both elegant and meaningful," Catherine said warmly. The conversation reinforced that the family's restructured responsibilities were working well for everyone involved. Sophie was thriving in her expanded role, while William and Catherine could focus on their family priorities without guilt about unmet royal obligations. As the day concluded, Sophie reviewed her upcoming calendar with satisfaction. Each commitment represented an opportunity to advance causes she believed in, while serving the crown with dignity and effectiveness. The balance she had found between personal passion and public service felt sustainable and fulfilling in ways she hadn't previously experienced in her royal role. The morning briefing room at Buckingham Palace buzzed with unusual energy as senior palace officials gathered for their weekly coordination meeting. Sir Clive Alderton, the King's private secretary, spread several newspapers across the polished, mahogany table, each headline telling a different part of the same story about the royal family's recent changes. "The coverage has been overwhelmingly positive," reported James Morrison, the palace's communications director, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the media analysis. "Sophie's charity gala generated more favorable press than we've seen for a royal event in months." King Charles entered the room precisely at 9 o'clock, his punctuality legendary among staff members. He took his seat at the head of the table, scanning the newspaper headlines with satisfaction. The transition of duties was proceeding more smoothly than even he had dared hope. "What's the public response been like?" Charles asked, settling into his chair while accepting the cup of tea that appeared at his elbow without him having to ask. "Polling data shows increased approval ratings for the monarchy overall," responded Margaret Fletcher from the research department. "People seem to appreciate what they're calling the family-first approach that William and Catherine have taken, while also responding very positively to Edward and Sophie's increased visibility." The numbers supported what Charles had sensed instinctively. The public was embracing a royal family that seemed more human and relatable, where members could acknowledge the challenges of balancing duty with personal life, rather than pretending such conflicts didn't exist. "There's something else worth noting," added Morrison, pulling up additional coverage on his tablet. "International media are portraying this as a modernization of the monarchy, rather than a crisis or reduction in commitment. Several outlets have used phrases like adaptive leadership and sustainable royal service." Charles felt particularly gratified by this interpretation. His decision to support William and Catherine's request for reduced schedules while elevating Edward and Sophie's roles had been driven by practical needs, but it was being received as strategic modernization. The meeting continued with detailed reports from various departments. The Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme, now receiving increased attention through Edward's expanded involvement, had seen a surge in applications from young people across the Commonwealth. Sophie's international women's rights work was generating requests for collaboration from organizations worldwide. We're receiving invitations for state visits that specifically request Sophie's participation in women's empowerment programs, noted the Foreign Affairs liaison. Her reputation in this area has grown considerably since she took on the expanded role. Meanwhile, William and Catherine's more selective approach to engagements seemed to be enhancing rather than diminishing their effectiveness. When they did appear at events, the impact was greater because their presence felt more intentional rather than routine. The Veterans Memorial Service last week drew unprecedented attendance, reported the event's coordinator. Having William there, knowing he had specifically chosen to prioritize that commitment, seemed to resonate deeply with the community. Charles nodded, recognizing that quality was indeed proving more valuable than quantity when it came to royal appearances. The family's approach was shifting from trying to be everywhere to being strategically present, where they could make the most meaningful impact. The conversation turned to upcoming challenges and opportunities. A major international conference on sustainable development was seeking royal participation. Several Commonwealth nations were requesting visits, and the traditional summer schedule needed to be restructured around the family's new priorities. I think we need to be bold about suggesting new approaches to some of these traditional events, Charles said thoughtfully. If Edward and Sophie's success has taught us anything, it's that authentic engagement often works better than ceremonial obligation. His staff began taking notes as he outlined his vision for continuing to evolve royal service while maintaining its essential dignity and purpose. The changes of recent months weren't just temporary adjustments but part of a longer-term strategy to ensure the monarchy's continued relevance. Later that day, Charles met privately with his constitutional advisors to discuss the broader implications of the family's reorganization. The government had been watching the developments with interest, particularly as public support for the monarchy appeared to be strengthening rather than weakening. Prime Minister's office has noted the positive response, his constitutional secretary informed him. There's appreciation for how the family has handled this transition without creating political complications. This was crucial feedback, as any perception of royal crisis could have created governmental difficulties. Instead, the changes were being viewed as evidence of the monarchy's ability to adapt and remain effective in modern circumstances. That evening, Charles hosted a private dinner for Edward, Sophie, William, and Catherine at Windsor Castle. The occasion was both celebratory and strategic, allowing the family to discuss how their new arrangements were working and what adjustments might be needed going forward. The children have been so much happier, Catherine shared over the main course. George actually told his teacher that daddy promises are different now because we keep them. The comment drew knowing smiles from around the table, everyone understanding the significance of that small observation. Sophie described her growing confidence in her expanded role, while Edward talked about the energy he felt from working more intensively with causes he cared deeply about. Their enthusiasm was infectious, confirming Charles's belief that they had found the right formula for their circumstances. What I find most encouraging, Charles reflected as dessert was served, is that we've demonstrated the monarchy can evolve, thoughtfully rather than reactively. We made these changes because they were right for our family and our service, not because we were forced into them by crisis. The conversation continued late into the evening, covering everything from specific, upcoming events to longer-term strategic planning. By the time they parted, everyone felt aligned on their roles and confident about the path forward. As Charles prepared for bed that night, he reflected on how the challenges of recent months had ultimately strengthened the family's effectiveness, rather than weakening it. The reorganization of duties had revealed hidden strengths and created new opportunities for service. The latest polling data had shown something particularly heartening: increased interest among young people in royal, charitable work. Sophie and Edward's passionate advocacy was inspiring a new generation to engage with causes they might have previously ignored, while William and Catherine's family-focused approach was resonating with parents everywhere. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. But Charles felt more confident about the monarchy's future than he had in months. The family had proven they could adapt while maintaining their essential purpose, and the public response suggested they were moving in exactly the right direction. 6 months after the royal family's quiet reorganization began, the autumn sunshine streamed through the windows of Windsor Castle as King Charles prepared for what had become a monthly family strategy meeting. These gatherings, once unthinkable in their informality, had become essential for coordinating the monarchy's evolved approach to public service. The castle's oak drawing room had been transformed into an informal conference space, with comfortable seating arranged in a circle rather than the traditional hierarchical layout. Charles had specifically requested this change, wanting their discussions to feel collaborative rather than directive. William arrived first, looking more relaxed than he had in years. His reduced but strategically chosen public commitments were allowing him to be fully present for both his royal duties and his family responsibilities. Catherine followed shortly after, carrying a folder of updates on their children's activities and their own upcoming engagements. The school run this morning was actually peaceful, Catherine laughed as she settled into her chair. Charlotte was excited about her art project instead of worried about missing time with us for royal events. Edward and Sophie added her perspective on the international implications of their approach. I've had conversations with representatives from other royal families who are dealing with similar pressures. They're watching our example closely, and several have mentioned considering similar adjustments to their own structures. The global nature of modern media meant that royal families worldwide faced comparable challenges in balancing tradition with contemporary expectations. The British monarchy's successful navigation of these pressures was providing a roadmap that others were eager to study and potentially adapt. What strikes me most, Charles said, leaning back in his chair with satisfaction, is how this experience has reminded us that adaptation doesn't mean abandonment. We've strengthened our core mission by being more thoughtful about how we pursue. The afternoon session focused on long-term planning, with discussions about how their evolved approach might continue to develop over the coming years. The success of their reorganization had given them confidence to consider other innovations in royal service. Edward suggested expanding their collaborative approach to include other family members who might benefit from similar flexibility. Anne has mentioned that she'd like to spend more time on her Olympic equestrian work while maintaining her other commitments. Perhaps our model could work for her as well. The idea of applying their lessons more broadly within the extended royal family was appealing. If individual members could focus more intensively on their genuine passions while still fulfilling their essential duties, the overall effectiveness of the institution could improve even further. As evening approached, their conversation turned to the upcoming Christmas season and the traditional royal events that would require their participation. Unlike previous years when the holiday schedule felt overwhelming, they were approaching it with anticipation rather than resignation. The Christmas message this year should acknowledge how much we've learned about balancing service with family life, Charles suggested. People seem to appreciate honesty about these challenges rather than pretending they don't exist. William and Catherine exchanged meaningful glances, remembering previous holiday seasons when royal obligations had overshadowed family celebrations. This year, they were confident that both aspects of their lives would receive appropriate attention. The children are actually excited about the Christmas engagements, Catherine shared. They understand now that our work helps people, and they feel proud rather than resentful of the time it requires. As the meeting concluded, Charles felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the journey they had taken together. What had begun as a potentially difficult period of adjustment had evolved into one of the most positive phases in his reign. The evening news that night featured a segment about the royal family's increased effectiveness over the past months, with commentators noting the strategic wisdom of their approach. Public opinion polls continued to show strong support, with particular appreciation for the family's authenticity and relatability. Later that evening, as Charles reviewed briefing papers in his study, he reflected on the broader implications of their success. The monarchy had demonstrated its ability to evolve thoughtfully while maintaining its essential character and purpose. His phone buzzed with a text message from William. "Thank you for supporting our decision to prioritize family time. It's made all the difference for the children and for our effectiveness when we do engage publicly." Similar messages arrived from Edward and Sophie, both expressing gratitude for the opportunities to serve more meaningfully in areas they were passionate about. Their enthusiasm was infectious and sustainable in ways that dutiful obligation had never been. As the year drew toward its close, Charles prepared his Christmas address with particular care. He wanted to acknowledge the lessons they had learned about balancing service with personal fulfillment, and to share how these insights might benefit other families facing similar challenges. The royal family had proven that adaptation could strengthen rather than weaken traditional institutions. Their experience over the past months had shown that authenticity and strategic thinking could coexist with duty and service, creating a model that was both effective and sustainable. The transformation had been quiet but profound, changing not just how they approached their royal duties, but how they understood the relationship between public service and private well-being. As Charles looked toward the future, he felt confident that they had found a path that would serve both the crown and the family for years to come. The royal drama that had begun with concerns about reduced commitments had evolved into a success story of thoughtful adaptation and renewed effectiveness. The monarchy had emerged stronger, more relevant, and more sustainable than it had been in decades. Entered together, both carrying the quiet confidence that had become their trademark over the past months. Sophie's international profile had grown dramatically, with invitations pouring in from organizations worldwide seeking her expertise on women's rights and survivors' advocacy. The UN conference invitation is quite an honor, Sophie mentioned, referencing her recent selection to speak at a major international summit. It feels wonderful to represent the family on issues that matter so deeply to me. As they began their meeting, Charles reflected on how dramatically their dynamic had changed. What had started as crisis management had evolved into a more effective and sustainable approach to royal service than any of them had previously imagined. The numbers told the story clearly. Public approval ratings for the monarchy had reached their highest levels in over a decade. More importantly, engagement with royal charitable causes was up significantly, with younger demographics showing particular interest in the issues Sophie and Edward were championing. The Duke of Edinburgh's award applications have increased by 40%, Edward reported with obvious satisfaction. Young people seem to respond to authentic passion rather than dutiful obligation. Their success was being noticed internationally as well. Other royal families were quietly studying their approach, with several European monarchies sending unofficial inquiries about their methods and strategies. William shared updates on his selective but high-impact engagements. The Veterans Housing Project launch generated more concrete commitments than any similar event we've done before. I think knowing I'm there by choice rather than obligation changes how people respond. Catherine nodded, adding her observations about their modified approach to patronages. We're able to dive deeper into fewer causes rather than spreading ourselves thin across dozens. The quality of our involvement has improved dramatically. The conversation turned to future planning, with several major opportunities on the horizon. The Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting would require significant royal participation, and Charles was pleased to have family members who were genuinely excited about their roles rather than viewing them as burdens. Sophie's work on preventing sexual violence has caught international attention, Charles noted with pride. Several Commonwealth nations have specifically requested her involvement in their programs. The ripple effects of their reorganized approach extended beyond individual successes. The palace staff reported higher morale and better coordination, as everyone understood their roles more clearly and felt part of a coherent strategy, rather than just responding to endless demands. It's remarkable how much more effective we've become by doing less but doing it better, Edward observed, summarizing what they had all experienced. Their success hadn't gone unnoticed by critics either, but even skeptical observers were finding it difficult to argue with the positive results. Media coverage remained overwhelmingly favorable, focusing on the family's effectiveness rather than searching for problems or conflicts. As the meeting progressed, they discussed specific upcoming events and long-term strategic goals. The monarchy was being positioned for the future, rather than just maintaining past traditions, with each family member contributing their unique strengths to the overall mission. The children's feedback has been the most important measure of success for me, William said, his voice carrying deep conviction. They feel secure in our presence and proud of what we do. That balance was missing before. Catherine smiled, remembering recent conversations with George, Charlotte, and Louis. Their questions about royal duties now came from curiosity rather than worry, and they seemed to understand that their parents' work was meaningful rather than just obligatory. The transformation extended to their private lives as well. Family dinners were regular occurrences rather than rare treats, homework help was consistent, and bedtime stories weren't interrupted by urgent royal business. We've proven that you can serve the crown effectively while also being present for your family, Catherine reflected. It just required rethinking what effectiveness actually means, Sophie.